Hello everyone. Welcome to the Zuko Chess Fun channel. In this video, I will discuss the beautiful checkmate by Grandmaster Mikhail who, with just a pawn and a knight, managed to defeat his opponent Robert Forbes in a match in Chicago 1988. Mikhail played with the white pieces while Robert Forbes played with the black pieces. Mikhail started the game with pawn to e4, and Robert Forbes responded with pawn to c5, Sicilian defense. White then moved the knight to f3, and black played pawn to d6. Continuing, white played pawn to d4, initiating a pawn exchange, which black immediately responded to by capturing the pawn on d4. Then, white moved the knight to d4, capturing the pawn. Black then played knight to f6, Sicilian defense Najor variation. Here, the black knight threatened the pawn on e4, prompting white to move the knight to c3, protecting the pawn on e4. Black continued with pawn to g6, Sicilian defense dragon variation, with the idea of bringing the bishop to g7 in the next move. White then moved the bishop to e3, and indeed, black responded by placing the bishop on g7. White played pawn to f3, and black moved the knight to c6. White then brought the queen to d2, preparing for long castling, while Robert Forbes proceeded with short castling. White then moved the bishop to c4, and black moved the knight to d7, activating the bishop. Mikhail initiated an aggressive move by advancing the pawn to h4, and black responded with knight to b6, threatening the bishop. The bishop retreated to b3, and Robert Forbes continued to target the bishop by moving the knight to a5. Mikhail allowed his bishop to be attacked and continued his assault with pawn to h5. Robert Forbes also ignored the pawn's attack and played knight to c4, threatening the queen. The queen moved to e2, attacking the knight twice. Black then played knight to e3, capturing the bishop, and white's queen captured the knight. Black's knight on b3 then captured the bishop, and white's pawn on b3 captured the knight. Both of Mikhail's bishops were now removed from the board, and both sides of the defense were exposed. There was no longer a safe side for Mikhail's king to castle. This was precisely what Robert Forbes aimed for. Black then moved the bishop to d7, and despite the threats, Mikhail boldly proceeded with long castling. Black played pawn to e6, and white played pawn to f4. Black then moved the queen to b6, pinning the knight, and white continued with pawn to f5, initiating a pawn exchange. Black chose to capture the pawn on g6 with the pawn. White continued by capturing the pawn, and black moved the king to h8. White then moved the rook to f1, intending to advance the pawn to threaten the bishop in the next move, trapping it. So black moved the bishop to d4, capturing the knight. White's rook captured the bishop, and Robert Forbes moved the pawn to e5, threatening the rook. Here, Mikhail sacrificed the rook and moved the queen to h6. If the pawn captures the rook, then queen to f6 would result in check. The king would move to g8, and pawn to h6 would lead to checkmate on g7. Returning to the game, Robert Forbes proceeded with queen capturing the rook. If the queen moves to f6, it leads to check. The king moves to g8. If the pawn advances to h6, then queen to g4 would be fine. But here, Mikhail played knight to d5. Let's see again. If the queen captures the knight, white's queen goes to g5, check. The king moves
g8,
and then the pawn advances to h6, leading to unavoidable checkmate. Returning to the game, Robert Forbes refrains from capturing the knight and plays the rook to e8, anticipating the knight to e7. Mikhail continues with queen to f6, check. The king moves to g8, and the queen moves to g5, check. If the king moves to f8, Then queen to h6 results in check. The king cannot move to e7 because it's blocked by the knight. So the king moves back to g8, and the knight moves to f6, check. The king can only move to h8, and finally, the queen moves to h7, checkmate. Returning once more, Robert Forbes moves the king back to h8. Tal proceeds with pawn to h6. Let's see if the rook moves to g8, threatening the queen. Then the queen moves to f6, check. The rook covers the check. The queen captures the rook, leading to checkmate. Returning to the game, Robert Forbes plays pawn to e4, guarding the g7 square. Tal closes off the queen's protection with pawn to f6, as the queen cannot go to f6 anymore. Forbes moves the rook to g8, intending to trap the queen. Here, Mikhail Tal's brilliant idea begins. Queen to g7, check. Sacrificing the queen. The rook captures the queen, and then the pawn on h6 captures the rook, leading to check. The king can only move to g8, and the knight moves to e7, delivering checkmate. That's the beautiful checkmate by Mikhail Tal. Thank you for watching this video. Please press the subscribe button and like if you enjoyed it. Leave your comments in the comments section. Stay tuned for my next video, and until then, goodbye.